John Steenhuisen has taken on the near impossible task of juggling two jobs at once. But does it make sense for him to continue performing in both important roles? We're going to determine that right here. Welcome to a new segment that I'd like to call Rating Ministers. And in this specific segment, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the performance of different ministers within the GNU to see how well they've done since entering office. Now, those of you who answered my poll about which minister you'd like me to review first overwhelmingly voted in favor of John Steenhuisen. So that's exactly who we're going to start with. And what's really important to understand about Steenhuisen is that not only is he the Minister of Agriculture, but he has remained the political leader of the DA. And so the question comes, well, does it make sense for him to do both roles? Because after all, they are both technically full-time roles. And so it seems pretty impractical to be able to do two full-time jobs at once. And so we're going to assess how he's done in both roles and come to a final conclusion. But before we get started, could I please remind you to subscribe to the channel? It's completely free, and all you have to do is click on the subscribe button below the video. Now let's get into it. So something that immediately strikes me as impressive is how the agricultural sector has managed to grow over the past few quarters. It's also happened to exceed the growth of real GDP in South Africa, which takes into account the entire economy. And so if we take a look here, we see how GDP in South Africa has constantly remained under 1%, and then in 2024, in Q3, it actually declined. Now, you might be wondering why I've only included the quarters of 2024 as well as 2025. So if we remember, in 2024 Q3, that is around the time that Steenhuisen assumed his role as minister. But what's important to understand is that there must have been a very difficult teething period because, after all, the DA and Steenhuisen had never been in national government and all of a sudden had to learn how to work with the ANC, which has been governing alone over the past 30 years. And so that was never going to be easy. And so I thought it would be a little bit more fair for us to take a look at Q4 of 2024, as well as the first 3 quarters of 2025, as a time when Steenhuisen really was in charge. Whereas obviously the quarters before that were the ones where he wasn't quite in charge of that role yet, either officially or just practically speaking. And what's pretty evident from the get-go is that remarkable growth that was experienced in the final quarter of 2024 and the beginning of 2021. Of course, when we look at our line chart, or even just look at the data on the left-hand side, we see how the agricultural sector, apart from 2 difficult quarters, has managed to consistently outpace GDP growth. And there's a pretty clear reason why. If we take a look at the exports of the agricultural sector in each quarter, we see how it has been pretty consistent. We see that in Q1, Q2, and Q3 of 2024, exports continuously grew until a slump in Q4 of 2024. Since then, however, we've seen a consistent rise of exports yet again to their highest point of $4.7 billion in Q3 of 2025. And as we'll see in the next few slides, John Steenhuisen has been working very hard in order to make this recovery happen. What's particularly interesting is that John Steenhuisen has been working very hard to ensure that agricultural exports to the US persist, despite the geopolitical tension between South Africa and the US in recent times. As we can see from this press release from the South African government, the agricultural exports to the US have remained pretty resilient. We saw that in the second quarter of 2025, they increased to 161 million, up by 26% from the same period the previous year. And so this is a very remarkable achievement, given how the tension between Trump and Ramaphosa just continues to simmer. We've also seen Steenhuisen make inroads in the Far East, as he has done with Japan. So in this press release, it's explained how John Steenhuisen and the Japanese Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries signed a memorandum of intent to enhance cooperation in agriculture. And so obviously this isn't quite a actual concrete deal, but it does signal an interest from both parties to further their cooperation. And as we can see in the MOI, it includes the development of smallholder farmers, the promotion of trade in agricultural products, food security and stable grain supply, and that means information exchange on food processing, livestock, and crop production, as well as the sharing of intellectual property in agriculture. And so it is definitely possible that this could increase both countries' agricultural production capabilities. Moving on to the nearby nation of Vietnam, where a trade deal was in fact struck. So as we can see in this specific article, this deal builds on the booming citrus trade. And as we'll notice, oranges in particular were a focal point. And here it explains how South African oranges officially entered the Vietnamese market in May 2024 after a bilateral protocol was signed. Exports have surged rapidly from 53,311 15-kilogram cartons in the 2024 season to 209,569 cartons in 2025. And so at the time of writing of this article, it had almost been quadrupled. So definitely some significant progress there. Probably one of the most significant trade deals, not only in East Asia but across the world, was signed between South Africa and China in October of this year. So as we see here, the Democratic Alliance explained in a press release how they welcomed the signing of a landmark stone fruit trade agreement between South Africa and China, and how for the first time South African apricots, peaches, nectarines, plums, and prunes will reach Chinese consumers. And so yet again, we see how unprecedented exports are being made to markets that were previously untouched by South Africa's agricultural sector. Now in December, we've seen how the agricultural sector continues to expand into new territories. So here we see how South Africa and Brazil signed a farm trade deal. And so it explains in this article that South Africa and Brazil signed a memorandum of intent to strengthen cooperation in the agricultural sector. The agreement was concluded during the G20 Agricultural Working Group ministerial meeting in Somerset West, Western Cape. And so yet again, we see how the stage is being set for more agricultural export deals to be made, this time in South America. And so I do definitely have to give John Steenhuisen a lot of credit. While growth in numerous quarters could have been better, and of course we have heard of issues in terms of vaccinations and the health side of things going a little bit awry, John Steenhuisen does seem to have done a pretty decent job as Minister of Agriculture overall, and certainly is outperforming his predecessors from the ANC. And so I would actually say that he probably deserves a B grading for his efforts. And I actually do commend him for a job well done and look forward to seeing where these new trade deals can actually take South Africa's agricultural sector. When it comes to his leadership of the DA, however, it is an entirely different story. If there's one way to measure the performance of a political party leader, it's election results. And right here, we have a spreadsheet that shows exactly how every leader of the DA, or previously the DP, the Democratic Party, has performed since the party was established. So starting with the national elections, we see how in 1994, Zak de Beer oversaw the first democratic election in South Africa for the DP and managed to get a little over 338,000 votes. In 1999 and 2004, Tony Leon was at the helm, and in both elections he managed to grow the party, firstly by over 1.1 million votes, and in his second election by over 403,000 votes. In 2009, Helen Zille took charge, and she managed to grow the party by yet another 1 million votes. And then in 2014, she produced another excellent result, growing by yet another 1.1 million votes. In 2019, things took a turn for the worse under Mmusi Maimane, where the party really slumped down to 470,000 votes lost. And then finally, under John Steenhuisen in 2024, the party slumped yet again, this time falling by over 115,000 votes. And so what's really important to note here is how Mmusi Maimane and John Steenhuisen were the only two leaders under whom the DA actually lost support on the national stage. But then if we look at municipal elections, we see a different side of the coin. And so in the 1995-96 municipal elections, we saw Tony Leon take charge. He was the newly minted leader of the DA, taking over from De Beer. And as we see, he managed to amass over 302,000 votes for the party. In 2000, he managed to grow the party astronomically to over 3.8 million votes. Now, bear in mind that, as is explained in this column right here, this is the total number of votes that the party received. So it's putting together the ward ballot as well as the PR ballot. And so if you want to know the exact number of voters who voted for the DP or the DA later on, it would basically be half of this amount, because generally you expect that the same person will vote for the same party on both ballots, although vote splitting is possible. Moving on, we see how in 2006, he did oversee a slight decline for the DA. It lost about 600,000 votes. And so this is the first time that the DA started to show signs of weakening. In 2011, Helen Zille took charge, and she oversaw a massive improvement. She added over 3.1 million votes to the DA. And so what we actually see here is that Helen Zille, objectively speaking, was the most successful leader for the DA. In all three of her elections, both national and municipal, she was able to grow the party. And then, of course, Tony Leon is a very close second, as he only oversaw one decline, and it was a very marginal decline at that. When we look at the 2016 election under Mmusi Maimane, the DA did very well to continue growing. Actually, it grew to its highest ever percentage and vote tally, where it hit 26.9% of the vote. And what's also important to remember is that this was a year after Mmusi Maimane came into the party, so he did very well to keep the party stable and actually increase its vote on the local level. But then, under John Steenhuisen in 2021, the party collapsed, losing almost 3 million votes. And so what this shows you when adding up the national elections with the municipal elections is that John Steenhuisen is the only leader of the DA who has not only overseen a decline in both elections, but every single one of his election results has been in the red. Every election result that John Steenhuisen has been the leader of the DA has seen a decline in voters for the DA. Even Mmusi Maimane, who struggled in 2019, managed to grow the party in 2016. And so if we're looking at the statistics, it is clear that John Steenhuisen is the worst performing DA leader in the party's history. But wait, there's more. While statistics obviously tell a very important story, it's also important to take into account the character of John Steenhuisen and whether or not he makes for a natural-born leader. Now, something that was quite alarming is his recent credit card debt scandal. If you'd like to learn a little more about that, please click on the video above. But what you need to understand from that experience is that this is a man who has been earning a hefty salary in Parliament. He's not like an ordinary South African or the 80% of South Africans, as he claims. After all, he went about 150,000 rand into debt. It doesn't really make sense because at the end of the day, since 2011, he has been a member of Parliament. And since becoming the Minister of Agriculture, his annual salary reaches almost 3 million rand. And so for him to go into so much debt with such a massive salary, as well as many parliamentary perks, including travel allowances, even for his spouse, free mobile phones as well as a mobile phone plan, laptop computers, as well as other perks, it really makes no sense for him to go into so much debt. And one has to wonder, A, is he a fiscally responsible person? Because it certainly doesn't seem that way. And B, what is he spending his money on? Many people have called for lifestyle audits of politicians because, after all, unlike normal people who understandably can go into debt because times are tough, politicians need to be held to a higher standard. They are public servants. They earn taxpayer money, and so it is important for us to know where is that money going. But beyond that, what we also need to understand is that while many people have criticized ANC members for their lifestyle choices, you cannot just simply disregard what Steenhuisen is doing simply because he's a member of the DA or he's of a different demographic group. All politicians need to be held to the same account. Now, beyond the debt fiasco, there's also a personality problem that Steenhuisen has. You see, while he was the chief whip of the DA in Parliament, he was incredibly outgoing. He was very direct, confrontational, holding other opposition parliamentarians to account. But all that seems to have gone away. Since being the DA leader, and especially since becoming the Minister of Agriculture, he seems to really love pandering to the ANC and showing zero backbone at all. This is highly evident in the video that I am about to play for you. The video where he spoke to President Donald Trump in the White House. Let's watch.
Platforms. I also want to just say this, that the two individuals that are in that video that you've seen are both leaders of opposition minority parties in South Africa. Mkhonto Wesizwe under Mr. Zuma and the economic freedom fighters under Mr. Malema. Now, the reason that my party, the Democratic Alliance, which has been an opposition party for over 30 years, chose to join hands with Mr. Ramaphosa's party was precisely to keep those people out of power. We cannot have those people sitting in the union building making decisions. And that is why, after 30 years of us exchanging barbs across the floor in Parliament and trying to get one over on each other, we've decided to join hands precisely to keep that lot out of government. Because the day they get in to the doors of the union buildings in South Africa or control of our parliament, that's what you're going to see. And that is why this government, working together, needs the support of our allies around the world so that we can strengthen our hand, grow our economy. And
all right. So as you can see, there are quite a few things to take away. Firstly, it's quite peculiar how, apart from addressing Trump, he never looked him in the eye, instead looking at the people on the side. Personally, I find that quite disrespectful. Secondly, if you look at the way that he speaks about the EFF and MK parties, he basically undermines the public by saying that these parties are not nearly as influential as what they really are. He calls them small minority parties who are outside of government. Yet the MK party is the third biggest party, not far behind the DA. The EFF is the fourth biggest party, and let's not forget that the two of them combined make up about a quarter of the entire vote. These are not small parties, as Steenhuisen falsely alleges. Another thing that's incredibly problematic is how he refuses to acknowledge the ANC's hand in this. To this day, Ramaphosa and the ANC refuse to condemn the singing of the Kill the Boer chant, the exact chant that Trump played in that White House meeting for everybody to see. And he also makes excuses, as does Steenhuisen, with Steenhuisen himself even saying how, no, don't worry about Malema. He's not actually a member of government, when in actual fact, he is a member of parliament. Ultimately, this shows a lack of spine from Steenhuisen. It shows that he is unable to stand up to Ramaphosa and really doesn't seem to be anything more than his right-hand man. And so, I do have to say, to Steenhuisen's credit, that he is a good member of parliament. He has been for quite some time, and he seems to be an effective Minister of Agriculture. but perhaps the time has come for him to step down as the leader of the DA. He is, after all, statistically, the worst performing leader that the DA has ever had in its history, and he only seems to be damaging the party with his poor performances on the world stage and the fact that he just does not seem to have the backbone as previous leaders. The party will do well to get rid of him come their next leadership election. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you found it informative, please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.